Often we want to look at the statistics for different groups like men and women's height separately. In this video, we'll show you how to extract different subsets of the data, such as a numerical vector or data frame, so you can compare one subset of the data to the other. Here we'll mostly cover subsetting by logical vectors, which is the most commonly used method. In R, subsetting is mostly done on vectors and data frames. In both cases, the square bracket is the key to tell what you want to subset from and which parts you want to subset. Again, before the square bracket is the data that we want to subset from, and then inside the square bracket is showing the condition, so which parts of the data we want to subset. First, for vectors, let's say that I have a vector called x with the following values. Now let's say I only want the values in x such that x is strictly less than 0.5. If I type this in, recall that this will return a logical vector with trues corresponding to the entries in x that are strictly less than 0.5 and false everywhere else. I can then use this logical vector to subset the values in x that are strictly less than 0.5. Again, before the bracket is what we want to subset from, and inside the bracket is the condition we want to subset by. Let's try to visualize what goes on in R when I type in x square bracket x strictly less than 0.5. Again, x is a vector, -1, 0.5, 11.3, -99. Inside the square bracket is a logical vector corresponding to true, false, false, and true. What subsetting does is it pulls out the values before the square bracket corresponding to the true values in the logical vector. This ends up with a vector that is -1 and -99. From our arguments above, notice that the logical vector only has to share the same length as x to perform subsetting. To demonstrate this, let's use the health dataset from the previous videos. How do I calculate the mean height for only the men in this dataset? Well, first I would need to identify which records correspond to male by looking at the sex column that corresponds to male. This will return a logical vector that has true for the records corresponding to male and false otherwise. Then I can get the male heights. Notice that I know the male heights are within all the heights. But to get only the ones that correspond to the male entries, I would have to subset using square bracket as follows. Then I can calculate the mean of the men's heights, like that. This returns NA because they're missing values within the vector. I can omit them by specifying the second argument na.rm equals true. I can also do all of this within one line by typing the following. Now what about data frames? Data frames are quite similar except that now we can subset rows and columns separately. To do so, we usually first type in the data frame name, followed by the square bracket. But now, the middle in the square bracket always has a comma. Before the comma, you want to put in a logical vector which specifies which rows or records you want. After the comma, it's usually a character vector corresponding to which columns you want. Again, before the comma, this is a logical vector where the trues correspond to the entries you want, and after the comma, this tends to be a character vector that has the names of the columns you want. For example, let's repeat the men's mean height as before by subsetting a data frame. Well, first of all, I have to figure out what are the names of the columns in the health data frame. Then I have to create a character vector that specifies which columns am I interested in. Then I can get the men's height, again by subsetting from the health data frame. Before the comma, I enter which rows I want, and after the comma, I specify which columns I want. Then I can calculate the mean of the men's height by removing the missing values to get the same answer as before. Well, what if I want multiple columns? In this case, all I have to do is specify all the column names of the columns I want. Then I can again get the men's height and weight from the health data frame. Again, I want the men's records and specify which columns I want. I can use the head function to just double check whether I have the correct data frame. What if I want all of the columns? In that case, all you have to do is simply not specify which columns you want, then R will automatically subset all the columns for you. The rows work in a similar way. If you want the height and weight for everyone, simply do not specify which rows you want, then specify which columns you want, then R will subset all of the rows for you, but only the specified columns. Now we can subset different parts of the data. You can enter these into different functions and make more meaningful comparisons.